on for right now, so at the request of others. So with that, we'll get started. Today, I'm going to turn over chairing the meeting to Vice Chair Heiner and let him handle it. And this is my wonderful little gavel and now his. So, and it's small enough to be thrown. Just remember that. So with that, Representative Heiner, it's all yours to do the announcements and take the roll and everything else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to chair today. And let's start, Kelly, with the roll call. Mark, oh, I'm sorry, Mark with the roll call.
Thank you. Representative Banks,
Here.
Representative Conrad,
Here.
Representative Heiner,
Here.
Representative Knapp,
Here.
Representative Larson,
Here.
Representative Lawley,
Here.
Representative Tarver, Representative Western, Chairman Burkhart.
Here.
Okay. Okay, so appreciate everyone being here. Good morning to everyone. If you have a cell phone, please turn it on to vibrate or silent. And those that testify today, we would appreciate it if you would introduce yourself and talk into the mic. Today, we're going to deal with House Bill HB 69, coal-fired facility closure litigation funding and amendments. And one of our own, Representative Knapp, will be presenting that. So Representative Knapp.
Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you. Today we have a bill, simple bill. Representative Larson could not be here to present the bill. He's caught up in appropriations, so I'm presenting, so I would appreciate you passing this or I'm in big trouble. So this is the coal-fired facility closures litigation funding amendments. And basically what the bill does is in 2021, in session law, we made it to where the governor had the ability to use these funds for litigation. And what prompted this was the terminals on the West Coast that wouldn't allow Wyoming coal to be shipped out of those terminals. So this provided money for litigation in that instance. And what this bill does is actually expands that. With the EPA's new rules that they've handed out for good neighbor policy, the transportation rule, the governor needs, and the AG's office needs additional leverage. It's basically the tip of the spear for what is a clear and present danger to Wyoming's economic future. So this bill just expands that to include local governments that can be sued, and more importantly, intervening in cases. And I've handed out some cases that we can go through if we'd like. I know we have time this morning, but one in particular I'd like to talk about. So that is the basics of the bill. I'd like to point out the one that starts with Indiana and Michigan Power, the Rockport Power Plant. And that'd be this handout here. And this is just an example of, we know we're going to have some closures across the country, but there's a distinction between that and early closures. And early closures where we've already invested money as citizens to make sure that our power plants are clean running. And these closures cost both money to the taxpayer, the rate hikes to the taxpayer, and it also costs Wyoming in revenues. So this particular one, as we look at it, this was to close a Rockport Power Plant 1 and Unit 2. So they have 2 units, one in 2028 and one in 2022. They were faced with adding costly environmental equipment, and so they entered into a decree with 9 litigants from northeastern states and environmental groups. And this agreed to close Unit 1 in 2028, and the consent decree leaves open several options for that unit, for Unit 2. The controls at a nominal cost would be $13 million to continue to operate the plant. However, the AEP announced it would let the lease run out on Unit 2 in 2022. The unit is young. Based on industry expectations, the useful life of a typical coal-fired power plant is 60 years. The chart below shows that the Rockport Power Plant has 20 to 30 years of expected life left. Rockport is needed. The generating output of Rockport Plant averaged 50% over the last 4 years. The power station generated 11,892 gigawatt hours of reliable electricity, enough to power close to 12 million homes for a year. Rockport is one of the largest plants in the Midwest and is competitive. Cost shows Rockport Power Station at 43.68, competitive with the market average of 34.82. Most importantly, Rockport is clean. Over the past decade, emissions or sulfur dioxide at the Rockport plant has decreased by 60%. Additionally, emissions of nitrous oxides have dropped by 56% over the same period, and particulate matter emissions continues to be very low, with more than 99% being captured. It costs jobs. According to the data from Federal Agency Regulatory Commission, 240 employees work at the Rockport Power Plant. These are permanent, high-paying jobs, and those will be lost. So importantly to Wyoming, based the fact that the Rockport plant consumes 5.5 of Powder River coal annually, metric tons, Wyoming is set to lose $10,236 annually. Given the early closure of both Unit 1 and Unit 2, the total tax revenue lost to the state of Wyoming is $264 million. So you can see clearly how this impacts Wyoming with these early closures. And typically, the early closures are without merit. They include costly closure costs, rate hikes, and of course, lost revenue with the taxpayers already having retrofitted most of the power plants. And with that, I would take questions.
Questions for Representative Knapp? Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Knapp, maybe if you could just do a little touch on the money that the EPN has spent. Has that come for this kind of money that would go towards those types of efforts?
Yes, so the money that was appropriated was $1.2 million for the AG's office and the governor. The particular case that we were involved in did go to the Supreme Court, which they refused to hear the coal port hearing at that juncture. So that money remains. However, in getting involved with these decisions, it just gives our governor a wider range of cases to be involved in and to act as an intermediate in. So to answer your question, those funds are still available and have not been expended.
Representative Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Representative Knapp, what is the thinking about how much of this money would be used to hire outside counsel versus just to supplement the work of the AG's office, in particular, like with experts and witnesses and those kinds of things?
Representative Knapp.
Vice Chairman Heiner, Representative Lawley. It's hard to say. I do believe that this gives the backing to the Attorney General's office to intervene, knowing that they have the funds to back them up, whether it be inter-office or whether it be contract work.
Follow up.
Follow up. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. So do you feel that's sufficient, the 1.6 million? Is the view that that's sufficient at this point until they navigate these cases that they can now either intervene in or commence?
Vice Chairman, Representative Lawley, I do believe the 1.2 million should be enough to start with cases, and if they should need more, they can come through the budget session.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Heiner. Representative Knapp, has there been instances where we could have litigated in the past that where we were unable to without this funding?
Vice Chairman, Representative, Yes, I think there's cases every year with closures that we could help either intervene or be a part of a cause. If you look at the other report that we gave, it's the impact of the EPA's proposed Good Neighbor Transportation Rule. And what's going to be happening is these are going to be ramped up with the timeframes that the EPA has right now on coal-fired plants. What you'll see is additional closures. I think you'll see this chart on page 4 of that study. And you can look at the different areas of the country and what dates those are expected closures. For instance, in SPP, there's 43% of coal capacity will be lost. Mountain West, 82% of coal capacity will be lost. ERCOT, 60% of the coal capacity will be lost. PJM, 38% of the coal capacity will be lost. And MISO is 61% of the coal capacity will be lost. And most of those, the date nearing is 2026. And so you'll begin to see a lot more of these closures happen prematurely. And there are lots of opportunities where we can help defend Wyoming's future in economic coal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Western.
Vice Chairman Heiner, going back to the Rockport plant, Representative Knapp said that a Wall Street conglomerate purchased Unit 2 of the Rockport plant. It was scheduled for decommission last year. Did that happen, or is this investor group, are they still running Unit 2, or what's the status of that?
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Western, I'm not sure if that was sold or not. However, what's clear is because that was purchased by a Wall Street group, their interest was no longer serving energy capacity. Their interest was that bottom dollar. And that goes back to the importance of being able to intervene. And if you'll notice, an amendment will be provided that also includes local governments, and parties, including corporations, partnerships, or other unincorporated associations. And that is the purpose of that, is to be able to deal with maybe something that isn't government-owned, but has become private.
Any other questions? Representative Knapp, I have one question. This fund has been out there for a couple of years now. I believe it's at the discretion of the governor to decide which cases they would like to litigate. With this new amendments, would that change, or would the governor still be the sole individual that decides which cases we should litigate?
Vice Chairman Heiner, this would continue that policy. The governor, and of course, the advice of the Attorney General to the governor, would decide what cases to become involved with. I think before it was more focused, and this kind of opens it up to become more involved in other cases across the U.S.
Thank you, Mr. Knapp. Representative Knapp. Any other questions? Representative Knapp, are you planning on taking us through the bill?
I believe if Mr. Chairman could do the bill walkthrough.
And I believe there's an amendment that you want to?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll do that.
all right.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Do you want to
As you can
introduce
see, we're a little,
Mr. Chairman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Chairman Burkhart, Chairman of the Minerals Committee. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. That's appropriate. So for the committee, we're doing things a little different this morning. And as usual, the legislature changes on a minute-to-minute basis sometimes. So Representative Larson cannot be here, and asked that Representative Knapp and myself help him with this bill. That's common And you'll find you may be doing that too as you're here and your bill is up in another committee simultaneously. So, Mr. Chairman, with the bill, what this bill does is in effect amends previous legislation, specifically in session law from 2021, although this account has been available to the governor for longer than that. What it does, and the meat is pretty much on page 2, appropriates the money to the governor's office for intervening in, defending, and prosecuting impermissible actions by other states or the federal government that directly impacts Wyoming. I mean, a company is free to close its power plants, but it's not acceptable or not permissible to close it to purposely impact another state. I'll just refer you to the Constitution on those issues. So it expands this to include the federal government, other states or third parties that result in a decreased use of Wyoming coal or the closure of coal-fired facilities that use Wyoming coal. And that's happening throughout the country. And I'll remind you that practically every school in Wyoming was paid for by severance tax off of coal. So that's pretty much page 2. Page 3, for the litigation the state is engaged in within section 2 of the act, and then the status of any litigation intervened in or defended, prosecuted, included, are required to have reports generated. So, and it's effective immediately. There are a couple cases out there that I know the governor is looking at pursuing. And again, it's the impermissible closure. For example, the good neighbor rule, we have enough historic background to show that, frankly, Wyoming does not cause ozone problems in Colorado. If you look at all those good neighbor rules, frankly, as the saying goes, they target red states over blue states, which is, again, picking and choosing who you prosecute. So this gives the governor some more leeway in the use of this 1.2 million, which was already appropriated. With that, Mr. Co-Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions for the good chairman? Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Heiner. Representative Burkhart, question, would this enable the governor specifically to intervene and or litigate with the EPA as he reduces, or the EPA reduces particulate matter from 10 to 2.5 and the repercussions associated with that restriction and or additional pollution criteria?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. Yes, it would give the governor the ability to do that, along with some other things. You know, there are some groups who don't like the nuclear power plant going in Kemmer, and who would try to stop that. It gives the governor the ability to fight those lawsuits that come against the state and to push for the state's interests over frivolous issues, really. So,
Any other follow-up? Mr. or Representative Conrad, did you have a follow-up?
No, sir. Thank you. That clarified. I was just curious, specifically based on the movement by the EPA currently to reduce PM10 down to PM 2.5 and the repercussions that could have on respective power generation plants. Thank you.
Okay. Any
Mr.
other
Vice Chair,
questions?
that,
Mr.
yes,
Chairman.
we can. And in fact, the state has already joined in some of those lawsuits. We are the lead state in some, and we're also members in other suits, and others we've issued amicus briefs. So this just gives the governor money, allows the governor to use that money in a broader fashion other than just litigation on coal issues and litigation specific to the state. It broadens that ability, and I think the governor would appreciate having that ability. Lawsuits are expensive. As you're familiar with the sue and settle approach of many organizations, this puts the state's money where it is. And my concern would be is that 1.2 million might not be enough, but that's a personal issue, I guess, although we can talk about it. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Vice Chair.
Representative Conrad.
I'll follow up. Thank you, Vice Chairman Heiner, does this include public and private entities within the state?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Conrad, yes, it would. There is an amendment to make that clear and to clarify that.
Okay.
Because again, when you impact some of the private companies, you also impact the people of this state. And that with employment, with taxes and our tax base. And like I said, almost every school in Wyoming was built with coal severance tax money. And we wish to continue that, and we'll defend our right to sell our coal.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Any other questions for Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, would you like to introduce the amendment now or at a later time?
I can do it as we discuss the bill.
Okay.
It's not very extensive and I'll just do that as we discuss the bill.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Chairman or Representative Knapp? All right. Any testimony from other representatives or legislators in the room? Any anyone from the governor's office? Mr. Luthi.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Good morning.
Morning, members of the committee. Excuse me, my name is Randall Luthi. I am the governor's energy advisor, and I'm here on behalf of the governor. And first of all, he welcomes you all back to Cheyenne in your second week, and a particular welcome to the new representatives. You have a few on this committee. So congratulations to all of you. I know you'll enjoy working these subjects. The governor supports this bill, and he supports the original bill, and he supports the amendment as it has been presented to you. You know, coal is so important to Wyoming. Wyoming is still the largest producer of coal of any state in the United States. It provides thousands of jobs, and approximately 90% of our coal is exported to other states, and nearly all of that coal is thermal coal, as coal that is used to produce electricity. Coal is over the years and continues to provide reliable, reasonably priced, 24-hour power to consumers across much of the United States. We particularly have seen in the last couple of years, as many companies have, and I hesitate, but I think it's safe to say, as many companies have rushed to go to just wind and solar, we see that might be a process that actually should be backed up with more reliable 24-hour types of power, such as coal. And what this bill does is allow Wyoming, it actually extends the opportunity for Wyoming to look into those cases outside of the state of Wyoming, to look into those other PEC cases, to look into other areas where it's appropriate that we can use Wyoming's money to help defend the use of coal. Originally, this legislation was very much welcomed by the governor, but it was very narrow. It was targeted just towards other states. And it didn't take long to see, as you know, administrations change, policies change. And we're currently under a situation where many in the administration believe that the best way to solve their climate issues, our climate issues, is to just end the use of coal. We do not believe that. Governor Gordon does not believe that. He has said on many occasions that burning coal is not the issue. Coal is a reliably good source of fuel. Release of CO2 is the issue. That is where the target should be, not just on coal. The amendments to the bill, or the bill itself, what actually broadens it up, and so that we could actually use this money against the federal government. Representative Conrad, you mentioned the 2.5 particulate rule. That is a particular concern. Representative Knapp, you mentioned what often referred to as the ozone transport rule, or the good neighbor rule. We frankly believe that rule is neither. It's neither good nor is it a good neighbor. And therefore, we're very interested that when the time is right, and should it be necessary, that we have more than enough resources to challenge this in court. That won't be tomorrow. We're currently going through the rulemaking process. We are finalizing our comments, which question the modeling of that rule, which question the basis of the rule, and which questions the accuracy of how they're seeing how Wyoming activities are going to influence other states such as Colorado. But we want to be ready. The amendment before you actually goes another step further and says, well, okay, while we're looking at it, why don't we have the opportunity to look at what some local governments are doing? We see more and more local governments are making efforts to ban fossil fuels. Ordinances such as many as one in Portland would also ban the transport of coal through Portland in order to be shipped. You know, that's a touchy subject when you want to start getting really down deep into local government. I recognize that, the governor recognizes that. But there are times where it may very well be necessary to protect the ability of Wyoming's coal and the Interstate Commerce Clause, where we have that opportunity to bring that forward. It's been mentioned a couple of times, so you've had this 1.2 million, so you haven't used it so far. So I actually think you're going to use it again. Well, I think by opening it up, it certainly opens that opportunity. You know, litigation is just one tool, but it's a big tool. And I think it's very important to have that arrow in our quiver, that we have the ability to move forward. The governor's been very judicious about how he spends money. He works carefully at the AG's office and finding those cases where we think we will have the best argument to put forward. And this bill and this amendment allows us to do that. And I think above all, it sends a very clear message, that Wyoming is supportive of good environment, and we're supportive of having reliable coal. We're supportive of having reliable fuel to help supply the nation. Ultimately, it will be the consumer's choice. You know, I think all the trends say coal is going to gradually decrease. I don't think anyone has too much, argues with those, certainly those forecasts. But there is no reason that it needs to decrease before it has to. And above all, it gives everyone more time. You heard the governor in his State of the State address talk about the importance of carbon capture, CO2 capture on a coal-fired plant. That is our goal for Wyoming. Technology exists. We're continuing to test more technologies at the Integrated Test Center. For every week, for every month, for every year that we can prolong the use of coal in some of these other power plants, that it makes it even more possible for this technology to become more accepted, more tested, and more economical. If the fight on climate change is true, if we are really concerned about what greenhouse gases do to the climate, it's a worldwide issue. It's not just a Wyoming issue. It's not just a US issue. The technology that we develop in Wyoming can be used across the world to reduce CO2. So overall, another part, we mentioned a little bit about why we're expanding it with this amendment. But you know, there are also corporations that could also start to affect our coal market. I mention this, I sort of aside because I don't want to get everybody too excited. But at the moment, Wyoming is actually having a resurgence of coal. Why? Because we found that just going to wind and solar is not being able to cover all those areas across the country. We are shipping more coal, we are selling more coal than we did a year ago. What is our biggest impediment at the moment? Lack of trains, which I think is very, very interesting. So once again, we've opened that up should it be necessary. I point out that one of the major coal companies operating in Wyoming and Montana just sued one of the railroads. We may want to look at that. We just don't know. So Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your attention to this matter. We have not asked for additional funds because frankly, we may want to make sure that we want to see what you've given us so far and to spend it wisely. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Luthi. Appreciate the testimony and for you being here. Are there any questions for Mr. Luthi? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Lucan, I have a question about the term litigation and the governor's office view of, do you view it that that term litigation also encompasses other alternative resolution, dispute resolution processes like mediation or even some kind of a arbitration process? Or do you view this as exclusively using the track of litigation? I didn't see any definition of that word in this statute.
Mr. Luthi?
Yeah. Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Lawley, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. I would answer it, the litigation is very broad and encompasses all of that. Often in federal litigation, you often have the option to go to mediation or some of the other party alternative dispute resolution. So I would say it includes all aspects.
Okay.
Follow up?
Follow up? Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Would you say it also includes pre-litigation alternative dispute resolution? Not one court ordered in the context of litigation?
Mr.
Mr.
Luthi?
Vice Chairman, you're Representative Lawley, now you're really getting into the weeds, aren't you? I hesitate venturing too far, but part of litigation is preparation. Part of litigation is making sure you have the facts necessary to move forward. Part of litigation is being able to do the studies to back up what your arguments would be. So I may be going out on a limb, but if it can be related to the AG's litigation or intervention or the case, I believe this could be covered.
Can I do one more follow-up?
Follow up, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Would it be helpful in your view for the litigation, for this bill to be amended to include alternative dispute resolution to clarify that? Or do you feel that's not necessary?
Mr. Luthi?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Lawley, I'd like to go as it is right now.
Okay.
But you'll find that I'm generally not shy if something hasn't worked. I look forward to working with members of this committee to make those changes in the future.
Thank you.
Representative Conrad?
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you. Mr. Luthi, good to see you. And one question for you specifically. In last year, I believe there was litigation as it related to the Jim Bridger power plant and the installation of the SCRs. In that litigation, did the governor use any funding for that litigation? Or would this, as an example, if this manifested itself in the future, would this where that pot of money would come from for that litigation? Just a clarifying question related to the Jim Bridger and the SCR comment with the EPA.
Mr.
Luthi?
Vice Chairman. Representative Conrad, again, thank you for that question. At this time, this money would not have been available for that. So we would have used funds that were regularly available through the AG's office, which we did. Again, by opening this up, it does open this fund for those possibilities.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you, Mr. Luthi.
Any other questions for Mr. Luthi? It appears there are no other questions. Mr. Luthi, thank you for being here. Mr. Luthi is one of our alumni. He was a legislator for many years and is, in fact, was a Speaker of the House for a number of years. So appreciate you being here representing the governor's office.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And I might just add that I think it's a little more enjoyable to ask the questions than to answer them, but I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Payback. Anyone else from the governor's office that would like to testify? Representatives, any representatives that would like to testify? Mr. Representative Bear, I saw that you came in late. Other agencies of the state of Wyoming that would like to testify at this time? Seeing none, any other public testimony that would like to come forward and testify? Anyone in the room? Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Shannon Anderson with Powder River Basin Resource Council. I'm our staff attorney out of our Sheridan office. And we are opposed to this bill. And let me just give you a little bit of history on the fiscal considerations around this bill. So this bill, as it was mentioned previously, was really about suing states. So Wyoming suing another state. And the reason that's important is because that brings up the original jurisdiction of the US Supreme Court. And so when Wyoming sues Washington or Colorado as originally contemplated under this source of funding, that would be a US Supreme Court case. Those cases, as you might guess, are very complicated. They're expensive. They require often outside counsel to represent the state and our interests. So that's why that $1.2 million was in that original pot of money. It was really about those Supreme Court cases. So now the proposal is to expand that use of money. This was a bill last year. It did die because it didn't get brought up in time on the House floor last year, but it was brought up last year as well. And again, the idea now is to expand it into basically any kind of litigation revolving coal. That kind of litigation has been already mentioned, is already covered by the Attorney General's office. There's already existing funding for lawyers of the state to do this work. So I think there's a question of the additional 1.2 million and how it will be used. And again, your legislative oversight over that money. Typically when the governor's office or the AG's office needs additional funding, they do a budget request for you all. It's in the budget of that agency. This is standalone session law that's like a fund that the governor has independent authority over. So it's also a concern, I think, for you all, like how is this money managed? What's your legislative oversight? How is the appropriation being dealt with effectively for you to make sure that it's being used wisely? Private counsel isn't the same as state's attorneys. Our neighbor to the southwest Utah has run into this issue with hiring private counsel. They go to very nice dinners. They, fly first business class on planes. They spend money differently than state's attorneys do. And so there's a real need for the state, I think, to have good, strict fiscal oversight over this money. The other thing I would mention to you is that there's another pot of money called the coal marketing account that has $1 million in it. That is exactly for the kind of thing that we've been talking about as well, which is intervention and utility commission proceedings. So this is the pre-litigation stage where you're actually going to like Illinois or Indiana and participating in those proceedings that really are the necessary piece to determine whether a coal plant is retired or not. And you have to participate in those administrative proceedings in order to do litigation later. So there is, again, this other pot of money that's available as well. So we would just caution you, I think, on the money involved in this and to make sure that you have strong fiscal oversight over the funding and that, we're not kind of double dipping or creating duplication when the money is already there to do exactly what the state has already been doing. As the governor mentioned in the State of the State, there's 30 lawsuits out there already. He has money to do it. The Attorney General's office has money to do it, and they are doing it. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. And on the substance as well, for any litigation that our organization may be involved in, happy to talk that through as well.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any questions for Ms. Anderson? Representative Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I call your attention there on page 3 in section 3, where it talks about the Appropriations Committee and this committee having oversight and the Attorney General and the governor reporting to this committee on the expenditure of funds. So I'm just a little bit confused on where you think we don't have oversight on the funding.
Yeah,
Ms.
Mr.
Anderson.
Vice Chair, Representative Banks, that's a great question. So again, normally in the budgeting process, there would be like a budget footnote that you all would create that would then kind of direct the governor's office to do something. And it would be probably specific to a particular case or a particular rule, some kind of action. And this has been done, for instance, on the Clean Power Plan a few years back. There was specific kind of legislative direction to get involved in that particular proceeding. Could be with the PM 2.5 rule or wherever you want to direct the governor and the Attorney General's office to focus. This is a much broader kind of directive, and it gives the governor kind of the authority to initiate things, and then he's reporting back versus, again, the legislature sort of saying, this is what we want you to spend the money on. So it's just a different process. And then the other thing I would say about that reporting is it can be confidential because it involves litigation. And so there's not a public ability to see those reports sometimes, so.
Any other questions? Representative Conrad.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you. Clarifying question. So if I understand correctly, correct me if I am wrong, this is really a fiduciary question, or more importantly, using the words a scope creep on behalf of what's available already. Would that be fair to say that's your major concern?
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Conrad, that's exactly right. We believe there's existing funding to do exactly what the Attorney General's office is already doing. And there's not a need to sort of allocate the 1.2 million that had a very special purpose to this broader purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Any other questions for Ms. Anderson? Thank you, Ms. Anderson, for being here.
Thank you so much.
Any other testimony from the public? Mr. Detaille.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the Minerals Committee. I'm Travis Detaille. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. Obviously in support of the bill, and there's been some good discussion and good testimony. And I want to just hit on a couple of things. When you have looked, if you've read our statewide newspaper of record recently, or some of the other online articles, they've been writing our obituary for a long time. And, I can tell you that right now, demand for Wyoming coal is as high as it's been in probably 10 years. Mr. Vice Chairman, Chairman Burkhart hit on it in his testimony. Our big problem right now is the railroads, and we just cannot get our coal to market. Our coal stockpiles at our utilities around the country that burn Wyoming coal are at their lowest level since the 1970s. And our coal has been in demand, especially in the last couple of years, given with what you've seen as the remarkable build out of renewables and utilities rushing to put them on board. And this question of reliability is a real question. And to answer that question, utilities are burning more coal. They want to burn more coal. High natural gas prices over the last year. We found ourselves in a situation here in December where utilities are practically screaming for Wyoming coal so that they can burn that low-cost coal to provide for their customers in a very significant cold snap. And because we could not get coal to those utilities in a timely manner, they were forced to dispatch $9 natural gas. And in some cases, people saw their utility bills double in December. So this question of demand of Wyoming coal, and one, our statewide newspaper of record ran a large expose that was highlighting the collapse of Wyoming coal. Well, that's not true. Wyoming coal is not collapsing. The demand is there, and it's going to remain there as long as we keep careening down this path of trying to put unrenewables or unreliable renewable power on the grid and bringing into question grids across the country of reliability. It's going to be needed. There's this question about, well, the market is deciding. The market's not deciding, the government's deciding. And that's what you see when you see these cases coming down the line from the Environmental Protection Agency on the Good Neighbor Rule, on the particulate matter. This is the government putting its thumb on the scales. And this is where this money comes in to allow the state to stand up and defend what is a bedrock industry of the state. And as long as we are reliant on minerals and extraction in this state, I haven't got the numbers yet for 2022, but in 2021, we pumped about over $500 million into the state's coffers in taxes, royalties, and fees. And as long as we're dependent on that, this is revenue for Wyoming. This is what runs the state, and it needs to be defended. And so we are supportive of this concept of giving the governor the leeway to fight these battles. And there was a question earlier about whether it's enough. Is it enough? Because I would tell you this much, and I'm fine with the appropriation in the bill. Don't get me wrong, but is it enough? Because I tell you what, in the next 2 years, we are going to see an unprecedented press from Washington, D.C. To keep our coal in the ground. I believe, personally, it's going to make the Obama years look like the Reagan years in what they're going to do. So we're supportive of this. I would ask the committee's favorable vote on that. And again, we're happy to provide those jobs and the revenue to the state of Wyoming. And we're not going away anytime soon, and those reports of our demise are a little premature. And with that, Mr. President, or Mr. Vice Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Detai? Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman, could I add one little thing before? I had mentioned the railroads, and I just want to keep this. I think Chairman Burkhardt has asked maybe later on in the session to come in and give a full briefing on the state of the industry, but I would note the train situation is dire. In the last year, our operators lost probably 50 million tons of production. And do the back of the napkin math, that's tens of millions of dollars in revenue because of the train situation and because we can't get our coal out. So the demand is there, and we find ourselves just in a real tough situation with the trains. So with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I will stand for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Detai, for being here. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public comment before the committee? Good morning, Mr. Obermueller.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, Pete Obermueller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I just would beg your indulgence because the previous testimony mentioned this other pot of money. And for the benefit of perhaps new members, maybe we should discuss what that is, because that other pot of money is important in so many ways. It's called the Federal Natural Resource Policy Account. And it is appropriated every 2 years by you all to the governor to do numerous things, including litigation. I don't have the number with me. I tried to find it quickly, but I couldn't find it. You could ask Mr. Richards with LSO or any of your appropriators, and they'll be able to tell you. But it's a small appropriation every 2 years. And the reason why I think you should be aware of it is because it is stretched to the max. It's used not only for litigation, but perhaps more importantly, it's used to help bolster the technical ability and the knowledge and the ability for county commissioners to be federal cooperating agents. By federal law, counties have the authority to sit at the table during decision-making processes, and because so does the governor's office, the state does too, but the governor's office is stretched too thin to do that. So counties become the front lines, and FNRPA helps to build their knowledge and expertise. In fact, every dollar that's appropriated to FNRPA could go to that cause, and maybe should, and would leave almost nothing to do litigation. We're involved in 3 cases right now where the state of Wyoming is also defending on the oil and gas side, and FNRPA is a very important part of that. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to bring that point with respect to whether or not this appropriation is too much or creep or any of that sort of thing. Mr. Chairman, there's not enough resources to go around in terms of the litigation that is coming our way right now.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller, for your testimony. Representative Conrad.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you. I apologize, Mr. Obermueller. The Federal
Federal Natural Resource Policy Account, FNRPA.
Resource, I'm sorry, one more time?
Federal Natural Resource Policy Account.
Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Mr. Vice Chair, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Obermueller? Seeing none, thank you very much for stepping to the mic, Mr. Obermueller. Other public testimony? Anyone else for public testimony? All right, seeing none, we will close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Lawley. Should we go through any discussion? Should we go through the bill if there's no discussion? Let's just go through page by page. Page number 1, any discussion on page number 1? Page number 2. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I would propose an amendment on page number 2. Mark, do you have the written ones, or did you hand those out already? Okay, so I'll do this verbally so that people can hear this, but you'll have a written version so that you can see it. So on page 2, line 5, after the word agencies, insert "and local governments." Then page 2, line 7, after the word states, insert local governments. After the word parties, insert including a corporation, partnership, or other unincorporated association. And if I can get a second on that, I will explain it.
Second by,
Okay.
by Representative Larson. Okay,
So
explain
the
the amendment.
explanation is, and I'll give you just an example, and I think we'll explain why it extends this to corporations, partnerships, et cetera, local governments. I know of a company that has authorization to ship coal from the port of Oakland, California, except the city of Oakland itself will not let them send the trains through there. So they're bottlenecked while they have a state permit from the state of California. Please, I have good friends in California. We all have an opinion, I know, but so the state has said, okay, go ahead. The city of Oakland has said, no, we won't let the trains go through here. So here's one where a city is in effect overruling a state, and I think that's a prime example of why you would want to be able to carry out a lawsuit against a local government if need be. So I think that's pretty much explains all of it. And also corporations that say, you know, well, gee, we want to do something strange. So that's the reason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any discussion on the amendment? We're on the amendment. Question being called. All those in favor of the amendment as proposed by, as moved by Chairman Burkhart, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by the same, by signaling with a nay? It is, the amendment is adopted as proposed. Back on the bill. Any other discussion on page 2 of the bill? Any discussion on page 3? Page 4. Members of the committee, any discussion on the bill?
Question.
Question being called. This is on House Bill 69. Mr. Mark, would you call the roll for a roll call vote?
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Tarver, Representative Western, Chairman Burkhart,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
Ayes are 9, noes are 0. The bill passes with amendments.
Thank you, Mark. The bill, House Bill 69 passes unanimously from the committee. And any other business before this committee this morning? With that, Mr. Chairman, we're adjourned.